Barron Trump was different from the other kids at school, and not just because of his famous last name. He was tall for his age, quiet, and preferred to keep to himself. While most students chatted loudly in the hallways or joked around during lunch, Barron often sat alone reading a book or sketching in his notebook. It wasn't that he didn't want friends. He just liked his own company more than the chaos of crowds. But being different came with its challenges. At first, people were curious about him. They'd whisper behind his back, wondering what it was like to grow up in such a well-known family. Some tried to be friendly, while others kept their distance, unsure how to act around someone who seemed so out of the ordinary. But curiosity eventually turned into something darker. A group of older boys started picking on him, making fun of everything from his height to the way he dressed. At first, it was small stuff, snide comments here and there, but soon it escalated into something much worse. Every day felt like walking through a minefield for Barron. He never knew when or where they'd strike next. Sometimes they'd trip him in the hallway laughing as he stumbled. Other times they'd mock his silence, calling him scaredy cat or saying he thought he was too good to talk to anyone. Barron tried to ignore them, hoping they'd get bored and move on. But instead, their taunts grew louder, meaner, and more frequent. The worst part? No one ever stepped in to stop it. Most kids looked away, pretending they didn't see anything wrong. Teachers either missed it altogether or brushed it off as harmless teasing. One particularly rough afternoon, Barron found himself cornered near the lockers after gym class. Two older boys blocked his path, smirking as they towered over him. One of them grabbed his backpack and yanked it open, spilling its contents onto the floor. A mess of notebooks, pens, and crumpled papers scattered everywhere. The hallway fell silent except for the sound of their laughter. Students passing by slowed down to watch, some snickering nervously, others looking uncomfortable but too afraid to intervene. Barron stood frozen for a moment, staring at the scene unfolding before him. His face burned with embarrassment, but beneath that, anger began to simmer. For weeks he'd swallowed his pride, telling himself it wasn't worth fighting back. But this time felt different. This wasn't just teasing anymore. It was humiliation, plain and simple. And deep down, Barron knew he couldn't let it slide. He clenched his fists tightly, feeling the weight of the decision he was about to make. He thought about going home and telling his parents. They'd probably rush to the school demanding action against the bullies. Maybe they'd even pull him out of the school entirely. But Barron didn't want that. He wanted to handle this himself. After all, running away wouldn't solve anything. If anything, it would only prove the bullies right. They'd think he was weak, exactly what they called him every day. No, Barron decided, he needed to stand up for himself. Not just for today, but for every single time he'd stayed quiet before. As the two boys continued to laugh, Barron bent down and started picking up his things. He moved slowly, deliberately, keeping his eyes low to avoid showing fear. Inside, though, his mind raced. He remembered something his dad had once told him. Strength isn't about throwing punches, it's about knowing when to fight and when to walk away. Those words stuck with him now. Today, he realized, was a day to fight, not physically but mentally. He had to show them that they couldn't break him, no matter how hard they tried. When he finally stood up, holding his backpack close to his chest, Barron took a deep breath. He looked directly at the boys, meeting their mocking grins with a steady gaze. "You're done," he said quietly, his voice firm despite the tremor threatening to creep in. The bullies stopped laughing, caught off guard by his sudden confidence. For a split second, Barron thought he saw doubt flicker in their eyes. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there, and it gave him hope. Walking away from the confrontation felt strange. Part of him expected the boys to chase after him, to call him names or shove him again. But they didn't. Instead, they exchanged confused glances, unsure how to react to this new side of Barron. As he disappeared around the corner, Barron allowed himself a small smile. It wasn't over yet. He knew that. But for the first time in months, he felt a spark of control returning to his life. And that, he realized, was the first step toward taking back everything they'd tried to take from him. The next morning, Barron woke up earlier than usual. He didn't rush through his routine like he normally did. Instead, he took his time getting ready. Standing in front of the mirror, he studied his reflection carefully. The boy, staring back at him, looked tired but determined. His hair was neatly combed, his clothes pressed. Small details that might seem insignificant to others, but for Barron, they mattered. Today wasn't just another school day. It was the start of something new. On the drive to school, Barron's thoughts raced. He replayed the previous afternoon over and over in his mind. The spilled backpack, the laughter, the way he'd stood up straight and spoken firmly. It had been a small victory, sure, but it felt monumental. For so long he'd let the bullies push him around, believing there was nothing he could do about it. Now, though, he realized that wasn't true. He could fight back, not with fists, but with strength of character. That realization gave him a sense of power he hadn't felt before. When Barron arrived at school, he walked through the hallways with his head held high. People noticed. Some whispered, wondering if he'd changed overnight. Others avoided eye contact, unsure what to make of this quieter, more confident version of Barron. Even the teachers seemed to take note, nodding approvingly as he passed by. Barron didn't say much. He didn't need to. His body language spoke volumes. By lunchtime, word had spread about what happened the day before. A few kids approached him cautiously, asking if he was okay. Barron nodded politely, keeping his answers short. He appreciated their concern, but he wasn't ready to talk about it yet. What he was ready for was preparing himself for whatever came next. After all, standing up to bullies once didn't mean they'd magically disappear. If anything, they were probably planning their next move. That evening, Barron sat in his room, scrolling through videos on self-defense techniques. He knew physical confrontations weren't ideal, but he also understood that sometimes you had to be prepared for anything. So he watched tutorials on how to block punches, dodge grabs, and create space between himself and an attacker. Then, he practiced in front of his bedroom mirror, mimicking the movements until they felt natural. Each punch he threw into the air made him feel stronger, more capable. But Barron quickly realized that learning self-defense was only part of the equation. Confidence was just as important, if not more. He remembered how those bullies had laughed when they thought he was weak and scared. Their smirks faded, even if only briefly, when he looked them in the eye and told them they were done messing with him. That reaction stuck with him. It proved that confidence could be a weapon, too. One that didn't require any physical effort at all. Over the next few days, Barron worked on building that confidence. He started speaking up more in class, raising his hand to answer questions even when he wasn't entirely sure of the answer. Teachers praised his participation, which boosted his self-esteem. During recess, he joined a group of kids playing basketball, surprising everyone, including himself, with his height advantage and decent aim. Slowly but surely, Barron began stepping out of the shadows, claiming his place in the world instead of letting others define it for him. One afternoon, as Barron walked home from school, he noticed one of the boys who'd bullied him hanging out near the park. The boy saw him too and hesitated for a moment before approaching. Barron tensed, bracing himself for another round of insults or threats. But instead, the boy muttered something under his breath and walked away without saying a word. It was strange, almost unsettling, but Barron couldn't deny the tiny flicker of satisfaction he felt. Maybe, just maybe, his newfound confidence was already having an impact. At dinner that night, Barron's parents asked how his day had gone. He shrugged casually, telling them everything was fine. They exchanged glances, sensing there was more to the story, but they didn't press him. Instead, his dad leaned back in his chair and said, "You know, life throws curveballs at everyone. The trick is learning how to hit them out of the park." Barron smiled faintly, thinking about how those words applied to his current situation. Later, that night, as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Barron reflected on everything that had happened recently. He'd spent months feeling powerless, like a victim of circumstances beyond his control. But now, he felt different, stronger, more resilient. Sure, the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would still be challenges, setbacks, and moments. of doubt. But Barron was ready. He'd faced his fears head-on, and in doing so he'd discovered a side of himself he never knew existed. As sleep finally pulled him under, Barron's last thought was simple, yet profound. I am not afraid anymore. And with that he drifted off, dreaming of brighter days ahead. The next morning, Barron woke up feeling different. It wasn't just the early sunlight streaming through his window or the cool breeze brushing against his face. It was something deeper. For the first time in a long while, he felt ready to face whatever came his way. He didn't know exactly how things would play out, but one thing was clear. He wasn't going to let anyone push him around anymore. At breakfast, his mom noticed the change in him right away. You seem lighter today, she said, tilting her head as she studied his expression. Barron shrugged, smirking slightly. I'm just tired of being pushed around, he replied simply. His dad, who had been reading the newspaper at the table, lowered it and looked at him. There was a flicker of pride in his eyes, mixed with concern. You sure you don't want us to step in? He asked. Barron shook his head firmly. Nope. This is my fight. When Barron got to school, he could feel eyes on him. Some kids whispered as he passed by, others gave him nods of respect, and a few still seemed unsure what to think. But Barron didn't care about their opinions anymore. He focused on himself, on staying calm, staying strong, and keeping his head high. The bullies hadn't shown up yet, but he knew they wouldn't stay away forever. And when they did come, he wanted to be prepared. It happened during gym class. They cornered him again, this time in the locker room after everyone else had left. One of them smirked, leaning casually against the row of lockers. So, big guy, he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, you think you're tough now? Barron froze for a second, his heart pounding in his chest. But instead of backing down, he took a deep breath and squared his shoulders. I don't think I'm tough, he said evenly, locking eyes with the boy. I know I am. The bully didn't expect that response. For a moment, there was silence. Then the boy lunged forward, trying to grab Barron's shirt. But Barron was ready. He sidestepped quickly, using one of the moves he'd practiced in his room. Before the bully could recover, Barron raised his hands defensively, creating space between them. Don't, he warned, his voice firm. The other boy hesitated, clearly surprised by Barron's reaction. You've got guts, the bully muttered, narrowing his eyes. Barron didn't respond. He stood his ground, his breathing steady, his gaze unwavering. After a tense moment, the boy backed off, muttering something under his breath as he turned to leave. Barron exhaled slowly, realizing he'd done it. He'd stood up to them without throwing a single punch. It wasn't about winning a fight. It was about proving to himself that he could handle whatever came his way. Word spread fast. By the end of the day, almost everyone in school knew what had happened in the locker room. Some kids congratulated Barron, patting him on the back and calling him brave. Others stayed quiet, watching from afar, clearly impressed by how he'd handled the situation. Even the teachers seemed to notice the shift. During math class, Mr. Anderson, the strictest teacher in the school, actually smiled at Barron when he answered a question correctly. It was small, but it meant something. That evening, Barron sat at the dinner table with his family, recounting the events of the day. His parents listened intently, their expressions a mix of relief and admiration. I'm proud of you, his mom said softly, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. Barron nodded, feeling a warmth spread through him. For so long he'd doubted himself, wondering if he was strong enough to stand up to the bullies. Now he realized he'd had the strength all along. He just needed to believe in himself. But Barron also knew the fight wasn't over. Standing up to the bullies was just the beginning. He thought about all the other kids at school who might be going through the same thing he had, feeling scared, alone, and powerless. He couldn't save everyone, but maybe he could make a difference, even in a small way. That night, as he lay in bed, an idea began to form in his mind. The next morning, Barron went to the principal's office before classes started. Mrs. Carter, the school principal, looked up from her desk, surprised to see him. What can I do for you, Barron? she asked, gesturing for him to sit down. Barron took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. I want to talk about bullying, he said, his voice steady despite the nerves fluttering in his stomach. Mrs. Carter leaned forward, her expression serious. Go on, she encouraged. Barron explained everything. The taunts, the shoves, the constant feeling of being targeted, and how it had affected him. He didn't just focus on his own experience, though. He talked about how bullying made people feel invisible, like their voices didn't matter. We need to do more, he said firmly. Not just punish the bullies, but teach everyone why it's wrong. We need to create a place where no one feels afraid to speak up. Mrs. Carter listened carefully, nodding occasionally. When Barron finished, she sat quietly for a moment, processing what he'd said. Finally, she spoke. You're absolutely right, she admitted. And I think you're the perfect person to help us make that happen. Together, they brainstormed ideas. A student-led anti-bullying committee, workshops on kindness and respect, and even anonymous reporting systems for students who didn't feel comfortable speaking out. By the time Barron left the office, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. Over the next few weeks, Barron threw himself into the project. He worked with teachers and counselors to organize assemblies, inviting guest speakers to share their stories about overcoming adversity. He helped design posters with messages like, "Kindness starts with you," and hung them around the school. Slowly but surely, the atmosphere began to change. Kids started treating each other differently, not perfectly, but better. Even the bullies who had once targeted Barron seemed to tone it down, perhaps realizing they were outnumbered by those who supported him. One afternoon, as Barron walked home from school, he noticed a younger boy sitting on the steps outside the building. The boy looked upset. His backpack slumped beside him. Barron hesitated for a moment, then approached cautiously. Hey, he said gently. You okay? The boy glanced up, startled. Yeah, he mumbled, though it was clear he wasn't. Barron sat down beside him, giving him space but letting him know he wasn't alone. You know, Barron said after a pause, it's okay to feel bad sometimes. Everyone does. But you don't have to go through it by yourself. The boy nodded slowly, tears welling up in his eyes. Thanks, he whispered. Barron smiled, patting him lightly on the shoulder. Anytime, he replied. As he stood up and continued walking home, Barron felt a sense of fulfillment wash over him. Helping someone else made him realize how far he'd come and how much farther he could go. That night, as Barron lay in bed staring at the ceiling, he thought about everything that had changed. From being a target to becoming a leader, he'd transformed in ways he never imagined possible. Sure, there were still challenges ahead, and he knew life wouldn't always be easy. But for now, he was content. He'd found his voice, and he wasn't afraid to use it. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity for Barron. Between attending meetings with the principal, organizing events, and keeping up with his schoolwork, he barely had time to catch his breath. But despite the busy schedule, he felt alive in a way he never had before. For so long, he'd been focused on surviving, getting through each day without letting the bullies crush him. Now, though, he was thriving. He was making a difference, not just for himself, but for others too. One of the biggest changes came during lunch breaks. Instead of sitting alone or avoiding the cafeteria altogether, Barron started joining a group of classmates who shared his interest in creating a kinder school environment. At first it felt strange, he wasn't used to being part of a group. But as they brainstormed ideas and supported one another, he realized how much he enjoyed their company. They weren't just teammates, they were becoming friends. Together, they planned an anti-bullying week, filled with activities designed to bring students closer together. There were poster-making contests where kids could express what kindness meant to them, storytelling sessions where older students shared their own experiences with bullying, and even a buddy system that paired younger kids with mentors from higher grades. Barron threw himself into every detail, determined to make the event unforgettable. On the first day of anti-bullying week, the energy in the school was electric. Brightly colored posters lined the hallways, and cheerful announcements echoed over the intercom reminding everyone to spread positivity. During homeroom, teachers handed out wristbands printed with the words, "Be brave, be kind." Even the usually stoic Mr. Anderson wore one, which made the entire class burst into applause. Barron couldn't help but grin. It was working. People were paying attention. By Wednesday, the highlight of the week arrived. A guest speaker who had overcome years of bullying to become a successful motivational coach. The auditorium buzzed with anticipation as students filed in, taking their seats. When the speaker walked onto the stage, the room fell silent. She began by sharing her story, how she had once felt invisible, like no one cared about her struggles. Her voice cracked at times, but her message was clear. You are stronger than you think, and your pain can become your power. As she spoke, Barron glanced around the room. Some kids were nodding along, clearly moved by her words. Others scribbled notes furiously, hanging on to every sentence. Even the bullies who had once tormented Barron sat quietly, their usual smirks replaced by thoughtful expressions. It was a turning point, not just for Barron, but for everyone in the audience. By the end of the talk, several students approached the stage to thank the speaker personally. One girl hugged her tightly, tears streaming down her face. Barron felt a lump rise in his throat. This is why he had fought so hard, to create moments like this. Later that evening, as Barron walked home, he reflected on everything that had happened. Anti-bullying week wasn't perfect. There were still whispers in the hallways and occasional glares, but it was progress. And progress, Barron realized, was worth celebrating. He thought about all the people who had doubted him, including himself, and how far he'd come since those dark days when he felt powerless. Now, he stood tall, knowing he had the strength to face whatever challenges lay ahead. That weekend, Barron decided to take a break from planning and organizing. He spent Saturday morning helping his dad clean out the garage, something he hadn't done in ages. As they worked side by side, sorting through old boxes and tools, Barron found himself opening up about everything that had been going on at school. His dad listened intently, occasionally pausing to offer advice or share stories from his own childhood. You know, his dad said as they took a break, leaning against the workbench with cold sodas in hand. Life will always throw obstacles your way. Sometimes they'll feel impossible to overcome, but the key is to keep moving forward no matter how hard it gets. Barron nodded, sipping his drink slowly. He knew his dad was right. Every challenge he'd faced, from the bullies to the late-night planning sessions, had taught him resilience. Each step forward, no matter how small, brought him closer to becoming the person he wanted to be. Sunday rolled around, and Barron decided to visit the park near his house. He hadn't been there in months, too caught up in school and his projects to take a moment for himself. But as he strolled along the winding paths, breathing in the crisp autumn air, he felt a sense of peace wash over him. Kids laughed as they chased each other across the grass. Parents chatted on benches and leaves crunched underfoot. It was simple, ordinary, and exactly what he needed. As he sat on a bench overlooking the playground, Barron noticed a familiar face. It was the younger boy he'd spoken to outside the school a few weeks earlier. The boy looked happier now, his shoulders less slumped, his smile wider. He spotted Barron and waved shyly before running off to join his friends. Watching him, Barron felt a swell of pride. Helping someone else, even in a small way, reminded him why he kept pushing forward. It wasn't just about standing up to bullies anymore. It was about building a community where everyone felt valued. When Monday morning arrived, Barron returned to school with renewed energy. Anti-bullying week may have ended, but its impact lingered. Students continued wearing their "Be Brave, Be Kind" wristbands, and teachers reported fewer incidents of conflict in the hallways. Even the bullies seemed to have softened, though Barron knew old habits died hard. Still, he remained hopeful. Change didn't happen overnight, but it did happen if you stayed committed. During history class, Mrs. Thompson surprised everyone by announcing a special project. "I want each of you to write about someone who inspires you," she said, pacing between the rows of desks. It could be a historical figure, a family member, or even someone you know personally. Just tell me why they matter to you. Barron smiled faintly, already knowing who he would choose. That night, as he sat at his desk with a blank sheet of paper in front of him, he began writing. He wrote about his dad, whose wisdom and encouragement had guided him through tough times. He wrote about the guest speaker whose story had touched his heart. And finally, he wrote about himself. Not because he thought he was perfect, but because he was proud of how far he'd come. For years, he'd let fear hold him back, believing he wasn't strong enough to stand up for himself or anyone else. Now he knew better. Strength wasn't about never feeling afraid. It was about facing your fears head-on and refusing to let them define you. When he finished, Barron read over his essay one last time. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. As he slipped it into his backpack, he felt a sense of closure. Writing it had helped him process everything he'd been through, reminding him of the lessons he'd learned along the way. Life was messy, unpredictable, and sometimes downright unfair, but it was also beautiful. Every challenge, every victory, every moment of doubt and triumph shaped who you were. The next day, Mrs. Thompson handed back the essays with comments scrawled in red ink. Barron flipped to the last page, nervous to see what she'd written. Her note was short but powerful. "This is one of the most heartfelt pieces I've ever read. Keep shining, Barron." He stared at the words for a long time, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. It wasn't just praise, it was validation. All the effort, all the late nights and early mornings, had been worth it. As the final bell rang, signaling the end of another school day, Barron packed up his things and headed outside. The sun was setting, casting golden hues across the sky. For a moment he paused, taking it all in. The laughter of kids playing soccer, the rustle of leaves in the breeze, the distant hum of traffic. Life wasn't perfect, but it was good. And for the first time in a long while, Barron felt truly happy. Walking home, he thought about the future. There would still be challenges, of course. Bullies might try again or new problems might arise, but Barron knew he could handle them. He'd proven to himself that he was stronger than he ever imagined. More importantly, he'd shown others that they could be strong too. Together they were building something bigger than themselves, a community rooted in kindness, courage, and hope. And that, Barron realized, was the greatest victory of all. As the weeks turned into months, Barron noticed a subtle but undeniable shift in the school's atmosphere. The tension that had once filled the hallways seemed to ease, replaced by a sense of cautious optimism. Kids who used to keep their heads down now walked with a bit more confidence. Conversations in the cafeteria weren't just about homework or weekend plans. They were about standing up for each other and making the school a better place. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. And for Barron, that was enough. One afternoon during a free period, Barron found himself sitting in the library with a group of classmates. They weren't studying or working on assignments. Instead, they were brainstorming ways to keep the momentum going. Anti-bullying week had been a success, but Barron knew it couldn't be a one-time event. Change required constant effort, and he wanted to make sure the message stuck. "We need something that lasts," said one girl, tapping her pencil against the table thoughtfully. "Something people can turn to when they're feeling alone." Barron nodded, his mind racing. He liked the idea, a resource that students could rely on whenever they needed support. But what form should it take? A website? A club? An app? The possibilities felt endless, and for a moment Barron felt overwhelmed. Then it hit him. "What if we create a space where people can share their stories?" he suggested, leaning forward excitedly. "Not just bullying stories, anything that's hard to talk about. We could call it the Open Door Project." His classmates stared at him for a second before breaking into smiles. "I love it," another boy said, scribbling notes furiously. "It's simple, but powerful." The idea quickly gained traction. With help from Mrs. Carter, the principal, Barron and his friends secured funding to set up a small room near the counseling office. The walls were painted a calming shade of blue, and posters with encouraging quotes covered every surface. There, was a bulletin board where students could post anonymous notes about their struggles or victories, along with a suggestion box for ideas on how to improve the school environment. Best of all, the room was always open. No appointments necessary. When the Open Door project officially launched, Barron stood nervously outside the door, watching as curious students trickled in. Some came out smiling, others looked relieved, and a few even cried. But no matter what emotions they brought with them, everyone left carrying a little less weight. Seeing the impact firsthand made Barron realize how important this project was, not just for the students, but for the entire school community. One day, after spending hours organizing materials in the Open Door room, Barron was approached by someone unexpected, one of the boys who had bullied him months earlier. The boy hesitated at the doorway, shifting uncomfortably from foot to foot. "Can I, talk to you for a minute?" he asked, avoiding eye contact. Barron nodded, stepping aside to let him in. Inside, the boy sat down heavily, rubbing his hands together like he didn't know what to do with them. For a while, he just stared at the floor, silent. Finally, he spoke. "Look, I'm not good at saying sorry," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I feel like crap about what we did to you. You didn't deserve any of it." Barron listened carefully, his expression neutral. He hadn't expected an apology, especially not from someone who had once mocked him relentlessly. "Why are you telling me this now?" Barron asked gently, genuinely curious. The boy shrugged, looking miserable. "Because of this," he said, gesturing around the room. "You're trying to help people, and here I am, part of the problem. I don't want to be that guy anymore." Barron studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Apologizing takes guts," he said. "I appreciate you coming here. Just try to do better, okay?" The boy looked up, surprised by Barron's response. "Yeah," he muttered, standing up awkwardly. "Thanks." As he walked away, Barron couldn't help but feel a pang of satisfaction. Forgiveness wasn't easy, but it was worth it. Holding on to anger only weighed you down, and letting go allowed room for growth, for both sides. Word of the Open Door project spread beyond the school. Local newspapers wrote articles about it, praising Barron and his classmates for their initiative. Parents called the school, thanking them for creating such a supportive environment. Even teachers from nearby schools reached out, asking for advice on starting similar programs. Barron never imagined his efforts would have such a wide-reaching impact, but he welcomed it. If other schools could benefit from what they'd built, then all the hard work was worth it. Despite the growing recognition, Barron remained humble. He didn't seek attention or praise. He simply wanted to help. That humility earned him even more respect from his peers. When senior year rolled around, Barron was elected class president, a role he accepted with gratitude and determination. His campaign wasn't flashy or full of promises he couldn't keep. Instead, he focused on continuing the work he'd started, ensuring that kindness and empathy remained priorities long after he graduated. Graduation day arrived faster than anyone expected. As Barron stood on stage, waiting for his name to be called, he glanced out at the sea of faces in the audience. His parents beamed with pride, snapping photos like any proud family would. Friends cheered loudly, holding up signs that read, "We love you, Barron." Even some of the teachers dabbed, at their eyes clearly moved by the occasion. It was surreal. This shy, quiet kid who had once been afraid to speak up was now being celebrated as a leader. When Barron stepped up to deliver the valedictorian speech, the auditorium fell silent. He took a deep breath, gripping the edges of the podium tightly. "When I first started high school," he began, his voice steady, "I didn't think I belonged here. I was different, and sometimes being different feels like a curse. People laughed at me, pushed me around, and made me feel invisible. But through those tough times, I learned something important. Strength isn't about never falling. It's about getting back up every time you do." He paused, scanning the crowd. "Some of you might feel invisible right now. Maybe you're struggling with things no one else understands, or maybe you're scared to take the next step because failure seems inevitable. But let me tell you something. You are stronger than you think. Every challenge you face shapes who you are. Don't run from it. Embrace it. Use it to become the person you're meant to be. By the time Barron finished speaking, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Students hugged each other, teachers clapped until their hands hurt, and parents wiped away tears. It was more than just a graduation ceremony. It was a celebration of resilience, growth, and hope. And at the center of it all was Barron, the boy who had once been bullied but refused to let it define him. That summer, as Barron prepared to leave for college, he reflected on everything he'd accomplished. From standing up to bullies to launching the Open Door Project, he had transformed not only his own life but the lives of countless others. Sure, there were still moments of doubt, times when he wondered if he was doing enough. But those doubts no longer paralyzed him. Instead, they fueled his determination to keep pushing forward. On his final day in town before heading off to college, Barron visited the park where he'd spent so many afternoons thinking and dreaming. Sitting on his favorite bench, he watched. Kids play tag and couples stroll hand in hand. Life moved on as it always did, but Barron felt ready for whatever came next. He had faced his fears, stood up for himself, and inspired others to do the same. Now it was time to take the lessons he'd learned and apply them to a new chapter. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Barron smiled to himself. He didn't know exactly what the future held, but one thing was certain. He was unstoppable. College was a whole new world for Barron, and he wasn't sure what to expect. The campus buzzed with energy, students rushing to classes, laughter echoing across the quad, and posters advertising clubs, protests, and parties plastered on every bulletin board. It felt overwhelming at first, but also exciting. For the first time in years, Barron didn't feel like all eyes were on him. Here, he could blend in, just another freshman trying to find his way. Still, old habits die hard. Even though no one knew about the bullying or the Open Door Project back home, Barron carried those experiences with him. They shaped how he saw the world and how he interacted with others. He couldn't help but notice when someone seemed lonely or left out. During orientation week, while most students stuck to their cliques, Barron made an effort to introduce himself to people who looked like they might need a friend. Some brushed him off, but others smiled gratefully, clearly relieved to have someone reach out. One of these encounters led to an unexpected friendship. A quiet girl in his dorm often sat alone in the common room, sketching in a notebook. Barron noticed her during his second week and decided to strike up a conversation. "Hey," he said casually, sitting down beside her. "What are you drawing?" She glanced up, startled, then hesitated before showing him her work. It was a detailed pencil sketch of the city skyline. "Wow, that's amazing," Barron said, honestly. "You're really talented." The girl blushed, mumbling a thank you. Her name was Alex, and she confessed that she didn't know many people yet. Over the next few weeks, Barron made it a point to check in with her, inviting her to join study groups or grab coffee between classes. Slowly but surely, Alex began opening up. She told him about her passion for art and her dream of becoming an illustrator. In return, Barron shared bits of his own story, the challenges he'd faced in high school and the projects he'd worked on. Their bond grew stronger with each passing day, and soon Alex became one of Barron's closest friends. As the semester progressed, Barron threw himself into college life. He joined a community service club that focused on mentoring underprivileged kids in the area. Every Saturday morning, he and a group of volunteers visited a local youth center, helping children with homework, playing games, and simply listening to their stories. Many of the kids reminded Barron of himself at that age, unsure of their place in the world, struggling to fit in. Being able to offer guidance and support gave him a deep sense of fulfillment. But college wasn't without its challenges. Midterms hit hard, and Barron found himself juggling assignments, exams, and extracurricular activities. There were late tea nights spent in the library, fueled by caffeine and determination. There were moments of self-doubt, times when he wondered if he was cut out for this level of responsibility. Yet through it all, he kept pushing forward, reminding himself of the lessons he'd learned in high school: resilience, perseverance, and the importance of leaning on others when needed. During one particularly stressful week, Barron received an email from Mrs. Carter, his former principal. She wanted to update him on how the Open Door project was doing. Apparently, the program had expanded beyond the counseling office. It now included workshops, peer mentoring sessions, and even a dedicated website where students could share their stories anonymously. Reading her message filled Barron with pride. What started as a small idea had grown into something far bigger than he ever imagined. Inspired by the update, Barron decided to propose a similar initiative at his college. He reached out to student leaders and faculty members, pitching the concept of a safe space where students could discuss mental health, academic stress, and anything else weighing on their minds. To his delight, the idea was met with enthusiasm. Within months, the project was up and running, complete with cozy seating, calming music, and a team of trained peer counselors. Barron named it the Listening Room, a nod to the importance of truly hearing one another. Word spread quickly around campus, and soon, the Listening Room became a cornerstone of student life. People dropped by during breaks, sharing their struggles or simply enjoying the peaceful atmosphere. Professors encouraged their students to visit, recognizing the value of emotional well-being alongside academic success. Barron took shifts there whenever he could, finding joy in connecting with classmates and offering a listening ear. It reminded him of why he started this journey in the first place, to make a difference, however small. By the end of his sophomore year, Barron's efforts hadn't gone unnoticed. The university awarded him a leadership scholarship, citing his commitment to fostering a supportive community. His parents beamed with pride when he called to tell them the news. "We always knew you were special," his mom said, her voice thick with emotion. "But seeing everything you've accomplished, it's incredible." Barron smiled, feeling grateful, not just for the recognition, but for the unwavering support of his family. Summer break rolled around, and Barron returned home for a few weeks. Walking through the familiar streets of his hometown, he realized how much he'd changed since leaving for college. He was more confident, more compassionate, and more driven than ever before. But he also felt a renewed appreciation for where he came from, the struggles that had shaped him, and the people who had believed in him along the way. One afternoon, Barron visited his old high school. Stepping inside felt surreal. The hallways looked smaller than he remembered, but the memories came flooding back. He stopped by the Open Door project room, peeking inside to see a group of students gathered around, laughing and chatting. One of the counselors spotted him and waved him over. "Barron, we didn't know you were coming today," she exclaimed, pulling him into a hug. "I just wanted to see how things were going," he replied, smiling warmly. The counselor updated him on recent developments, proudly showing off new additions to the space: a mural painted by art students, shelves stocked with books about mental health, and a calendar filled with upcoming events. As Barron listened, he felt a surge of gratitude. This room represented everything he stood for: hope, healing, and human connection. Before leaving, Barron addressed the students briefly, sharing a few words of encouragement. "This place exists because of you," he told them, "because you care enough to listen, to support, and to lift each other up. Never underestimate the power of kindness. It can change lives." The students clapped enthusiastically, inspired by his message. As Barron walked away, he felt a lump rise in his throat. This was his legacy, proof that even the smallest actions could create ripples of positive change. Back at college, Barron dove headfirst into his junior year, balancing academics with his growing responsibilities as a leader. He continued working on the Listening Room, expanding its reach and impact. He also began exploring career paths, considering fields like education, social work, and psychology, all areas where he could continue making a difference. Whatever path he chose, he knew it would involve helping others. Through it all, Barron remained grounded. He never forgot where he came from or the obstacles he'd overcome. Those experiences had taught him invaluable lessons about strength, resilience, and the power of community. Now, as he stood on the brink of adulthood, he felt ready to face whatever lay ahead. Life wouldn't always be easy, but Barron knew one thing for certain. He was unstoppable. And nothing, not bullies, not fear, not failure, could ever take that away from him. Barron's senior year of college flew by in a blur of deadlines, projects, and late-night conversations with friends. It was a whirlwind, but it was also one of the most fulfilling times of his life. By now, the listening room had become a staple, on campus, a place where students felt safe to share their struggles, celebrate their victories, and simply exist without judgment. Barron took immense pride in knowing he'd played a part in creating something so meaningful. As graduation approached, Barron found himself reflecting on how far he'd come. He remembered the boy who used to shrink into the shadows, afraid to speak up or stand out. That version of himself seemed like a distant memory now. In his place stood someone stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. Someone who refused to let fear dictate his choices. Barron wasn't just surviving anymore. He was thriving. The weeks leading up to graduation were bittersweet. Barron spent hours packing up his dorm room, sorting through 4 years' worth of memories. There were textbooks filled with notes, photos from campus events, and little mementos that reminded him of moments he'd never forget. As he boxed everything away, he couldn't help but feel a pang of nostalgia. College had been transformative, not just academically but personally. It had taught him how to navigate challenges, build relationships, and stay true to himself. On the day of graduation, Barron woke up early, unable to sleep past sunrise. He dressed carefully, making sure every detail was perfect. His cap and gown felt heavy but symbolic, representing years of hard work and growth. When he stepped outside, the air was crisp and fresh, carrying with it the promise of new beginnings. The ceremony itself was a mix of emotions. Students cheered as they crossed the stage, families clapped proudly, and professors beamed at the young adults they'd helped shape. When Barron's name was called, he walked confidently toward the podium, shaking hands with faculty members along the way. As he accepted his diploma, he glanced out at the audience. His parents were there, tears streaming down their faces, holding a sign that read, "Proud of you, Barron." Friends from college waved enthusiastically, snapping pictures and yelling his name. For a brief moment, Barron allowed himself to soak it all in, the culmination of years of perseverance and determination. Afterward, during the reception, Barron mingled with classmates, exchanging hugs and heartfelt goodbyes. Many thanked him for his role in the listening room, sharing stories about how it had impacted their lives. One student recounted how visiting the space had helped her cope with anxiety during finals week. Another mentioned how Barron's leadership inspired him to pursue a career in counseling. Hearing these words made Barron realize the ripple effect of kindness. It didn't just touch one person. It spread outward, reaching farther than anyone could imagine. That evening, Barron sat alone on a bench overlooking the campus lake. The Taui sun was setting, casting golden hues across the water. He thought about the future, what lay ahead and where his journey might take him. He still wasn't entirely sure what career path he'd choose, but he knew one thing. He wanted to keep helping people. Whether it was through teaching, advocacy, or community work, Barron was determined to dedicate his life to making the world a better place. A few days later, Barron returned home, ready to spend the summer reconnecting with family and figuring out his next steps. His parents threw a small party to celebrate his accomplishments, inviting close friends and relatives. Laughter filled the house as everyone shared stories and memories. At one point, Barron's dad raised a toast. "To Barron," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "You've shown us all what it means to overcome obstacles and inspire others. We're so proud of the man you've become." Barron smiled, feeling a warmth spread through him. He knew he hadn't done any of this alone. Every triumph, every lesson learned had been shaped by the people around him, his family, his teachers, his friends. They had believed in him when he doubted himself, supported him when he stumbled, and celebrated with him when he succeeded. The summer, Barron stayed involved in his community. He volunteered at local youth centers, mentored kids struggling with self-confidence, and gave talks at schools about resilience and kindness. Each interaction reminded him why he cared so deeply about helping others. These weren't just acts of service, they were opportunities to pass on the lessons he'd learned, ensuring that no one else would have to face their struggles alone. By fall, Barron had decided to pursue a master's degree in education, focusing on social-emotional learning. He wanted to teach kids not just academics, but life skills: how to handle failure, how to communicate effectively, and how to treat others with empathy. The program was challenging, but Barron thrived in it, drawing inspiration from his own experiences and the countless stories he'd heard over the years. Years later, Barron stood in front of a classroom of middle schoolers, watching as they debated topics ranging from history to current events. Their energy was infectious, their curiosity boundless. Barron loved every moment of it, the way their eyes lit up when they understood something new, the way they supported each other during group projects, the way they trusted him to guide them through tough conversations. Outside of teaching, Barron continued advocating for mental health awareness and anti-bullying initiatives. He traveled to conferences, wrote articles, and collaborated with organizations dedicated to supporting young people. His story resonated with audiences worldwide, inspiring parents, educators, and students alike. People often asked him how he managed to stay so positive despite the challenges he'd faced. Barron's answer was always the same: I focus on what I can control: my attitude, my actions, and my ability to help others. Looking back on his journey, Barron realized that the hardest moments had been the ones that shaped him the most. Being bullied had forced him to find inner strength. Standing up for himself had taught him courage. Helping others had shown him the power of compassion. None of it had been easy, but none of it had been wasted either. Every experience, good or bad, had led him to where he was today. Barron's legacy wasn't defined by awards or accolades. It was defined by the lives he touched. Former students reached out to thank him for believing in them when they didn't believe in themselves. Parents expressed gratitude for the positive influence he'd had on their children. Even strangers wrote letters saying his story had given them hope during difficult times. Knowing he'd made a difference was the greatest reward of all. One evening, as Barron sat on his porch watching the sunset, he thought about the road ahead. Life would always have its ups and downs, but he welcomed them. Challenges were opportunities in disguise, chances to grow, to learn, and to become even better versions of ourselves. Barron smiled, feeling a deep sense of peace. He had started as a quiet, unsure kid, bullied and underestimated. But he had risen above it all, proving that strength comes not from avoiding pain, but from embracing it and using it to fuel your purpose. And so, Barron's story came full circle, not as an ending, but as a beginning. A reminder that no matter where you start or what obstacles you face, you have the power to create change, both within yourself and in the world around you. Barron Trump wasn't just unstoppable, he was unbreakable, and his journey was proof that even the smallest spark could ignite a fire capable of lighting up the darkest corners.